What is up, guys? It is Marcus from Perspective Sports, and today we're going to talk conference realignment. And I really think the next conference realignment is going to be a big one because all of the major conferences' TV deals are set to expire between 2023 and 2026, likely where all of these moves will take place. And in order for the conferences to maximize on the amount of money they can get on these deals, to start adding teams from other conferences, maybe even some smaller conferences, meaning the group of five will have to start looking for teams to replace them, meaning they have to call some FCS powers. And a big story that might be flying under the radar is the Big 12 going to disband? Because if they lose Texas and Oklahoma, by far their top two moneymakers, number one, it's going to be hard for them to keep their Power 5 status, and number two, it's going to be hard to find a deal that satisfies all the remaining members. And so without further ado, let's dive right into it with a huge move by the Big 10. And in this move, the Big 10 adds West Virginia and Notre Dame. The Big Ten has made a legitimate case at being the best conference in college football, and adding West Virginia and Notre Dame will likely put them over the edge because the conference will now house blue blood programs such as Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin, Michigan, Michigan State, Iowa, Notre Dame, and West Virginia. That's 8 powerhouses or very good teams. Now let's discuss why these schools would want to join this conference, and let's start with West Virginia. The Mountaineers haven't had the best of luck in terms of being in a stable conference over the last handful of years, being in the Big East before it dissolved in 2013, and now being in the Big 12 that'll dissolve if Oklahoma and or Texas leave the conference, meaning West Virginia will likely want to jump the gun to join a more stable conference if it has the opportunity to. And it has a lot more to offer. Its basketball team, also nicknamed Press Virginia, is very good, making the tournament over the last 3 years and finishing top 2 in the Big 12 over the past 2 years, only behind none other than Kansas. And it also makes a lot more geographical sense for the Mountaineers, as West Virginia is the only school in the Big 12 not situated in Texas, Oklahoma, or Kansas, and Iowa, all states in the South. Notre Dame, on the other hand, is very different. They're independents, and they seem to be enjoying the life as an independent. But they've already felt the burn of not being able to get into the college football playoff because they don't have a conference, despite having 2 very good losses. But when you look at Notre Dame, that has moved all their other athletics to the ACC except football, where they're currently independent, as previously stated, and then they schedule a ton of ACC opponents per year. In fact, since 2015, they scheduled no less than 5 ACC teams per year. You'd think Notre Dame just finished what they started to move everything over to the ACC, right? No. Notre Dame has done a great job of maximizing their profits off the athletic department, and it would benefit Notre Dame more on the field and financially if they joined the Big Ten, because it would rekindle an in-state rivalry with Purdue that ended in 2014, and join a multitude of the aforementioned blue bloods, and also playing in a tough conference would boost their resume and allow them to get into the college football playoff with more than one loss, especially if they survive that now gauntlet of a conference that the Big Ten is, and the same cannot be said for the ACC. Now let's take a look at the new Big Ten, and I put Notre Dame in the West to balance out the divisions as much as possible, because originally I moved Indiana to the West, but looking at a division with Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, West Virginia, and Notre Dame, that's by far the toughest division in college football, and it would leave the other side looking pretty weak. So for balancing purposes, I put Notre Dame in the West with Wisconsin and West Virginia in the East because it makes more geographical sense. Now with the loss of West Virginia, the Big 12 has 9 teams, and assuming they convince Oklahoma and Texas to stay by promising they won't add more than 1 team from either state for recruiting and marketing purposes, they'll add that 1 team wisely by selecting the University of Houston, BYU, and Memphis. Houston has done a remarkable job of recruiting despite not being in a Power 5 conference and competing with pretty much every Power 5 conference for Texas recruits. They've had an average class of 65th, landing the 6th rated recruit in the country in the class of 2016. Houston also had an amazing run in 2015 where they went 13-1, winning the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl 38-24 over Florida State. Houston fits perfectly because it's in the heart of Texas, Big 12 country, and won't have an issue recruiting once they get into a Power 5 conference. But the Big 12 doesn't stop rating the American Conference there. They also add the University of Memphis. The University of Memphis is in SEC country, Tennessee, which is big in terms of recruiting, and because Memphis and the Big 12 would then be able to start stealing away recruits from the SEC and start to make an imprint of their own in the southeastern market. Memphis will likely become full members despite their other sports being lackluster, and their basketball team does have some history even before the Calipari days in terms of being successful, and will try to fill the void left by West Virginia. And finally for BYU, who will be the new West Virginia in terms of distance from everyone else in the conference. BYU is a Mormon school that follows their religion to a T, meaning they won't participate in any athletic activities on Sundays, but due to the fact that BYU is a national brand that actually averages more attendance to their games than students enrolled in the school by a long shot, according to an article written by SB Nation in July of 2016, BYU's average attendance is 58,966 per game. That's more than the Big 12 conference average of 57,941, and BYU will likely join as a football-only member due to the conference's inability to schedule around BYU's strict policies. And now let's take a gander at the Big 12. I divided them into a North and South division, and you guys don't know how bad I wanted to call the South division the Texas division. But Memphis is there, so that took the fun out of it. And don't worry, the Oklahoma-Texas Red River Shootout, or rivalry, as they call it now, will still take place on a yearly basis. But in the North, we have BYU, Iowa State, Kansas, Kansas State, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State. In the South, or Texas division, we have BYU, Houston, Memphis, Texas, Texas Christian University, and Texas Tech. And the trickle-down effect continues into the American Athletic Conference, who just lost their two biggest brands in Houston and Memphis, and those are two tough teams to replace. But they likely will be unable to do so because the Tennessee and Texas markets are so large when it comes to football that it would just be too hard to do, but they'll have to replace them with someone. So they'll bring over our first FCS team of the video in James Madison University, the defending FCS national champions, and Army. Army is a solid add because now they'll have the Army-Navy rivalry in conference, meaning their conference will have a standalone week. Because if you don't know, Week 15 is Army-Navy week in the NCAA, and the only games that are played that Saturday is Army and Navy, which is the ultimate primetime game for the schools and the conference. But Army doesn't seem to be in a rush to join a conference anytime soon because they're in the midst of their best season in a while and enjoying being an independent. But I really think they'll be able to compete in the American Conference, and they'll be able to get into some different bowl games if they have a breakout season, but they'll still be able to play in the Armed Forces Bowl if they don't. Now for James Madison. James Madison is ready to make the FBS jump if and when invited, in my opinion. They're a geographically solid fit for multiple conferences such as the ACC, AAC, Conference USA, MAC, being situated in Virginia. JMU hasn't had a losing season since 2002, and since 2015, the Dukes are 34-4, 1-1 against FBS teams, beating SMU and losing to UNC. The Dukes are also fresh off a FCS national championship where they upset number 1 North Dakota State in the semifinals, and James Madison also has FBS level facilities in their stadium that holds 25,000 people. James Madison, in my personal opinion, will be able to join the AAC and compete immediately. Now let's take a look at our new conference in the American Athletic Conference that now has Army, UConn, Cincinnati, James Madison, Navy, and Temple in the North Division, and ECU, SMU, Tulane, Tulsa, UCF, and USF in the South Division. And this is where the Big Ten's ripple effect stops. It's pretty cool to see how West Virginia leaving can cause all of these other moves. Up next is the Sun Belt Conference, who will be parting ways with New Mexico State and Idaho after this season, but Idaho, who's done the most embarrassing thing by conceding they can't compete at the FBS level and are actually downgrading to the FCS. But there is one bright thing that the Vandals can take with them, and that's that they've won all 3 bowl games that were in, and they didn't have to travel far, as they were all in Boise, Idaho. And after those 2 teams part ways this season, the Sun Belt will only have 10 teams, and that's not really a bad thing. But in order to boost up the conference, they'll call an FCS team that is very familiar with Southern teams in Chattanooga to come join their conference. And I've often called Chattanooga the SEC's punching bag because, well, it is. They've played an SEC team 4 out of the last 5 years. The only non-SEC team was the ACC's Florida State, who's also in the South in 2015. They've lost every time. But despite this being a down year for the Mocs, they're typically one of the better FCS teams, and the Sun Belt Conference has actually reached out to the Mocs before, but were turned down. But the Mocs didn't rule out a possibility of joining in the near future, because at the time they had an interim AD, and they weren't in a real position to make such a big move at the time. And now let's take a look at the new Sun Belt Conference that doesn't use divisions. They don't use it to this day. They have Appalachian State, Arkansas State, Chattanooga, Coastal Carolina, Georgia Southern, Georgia State, Louisiana, ULM, South Alabama, Texas State, and Troy. There will be no trickle-down effect from this, but there will be one from the Pac-12s. The Pac-12's realignment will include them stealing away Boise State University and San Diego State University from the Mountain West. Boise State is pretty self-explanatory. They'll have an immediate impact on the conference due to their familiarity and success against Pac-12 teams. Since 2008, Boise State is 109-21. That's an 83% win percentage. They're 12-5 against Power 5 teams, that's 70%, and 10-3 against Pac-12 teams, that's 76%. Boise State has by far the best resume of any Group of 5 team. One of the only knocks on Boise State is their location, but Idaho isn't really that much different than Iowa, Oregon, Oklahoma in terms of stuff to do, and all the programs there have put together successful programs despite being in relatively desolate places. Another thing is Boise State's academics. According to U.S. News, the Pac-12 has 6 schools inside the top 100, which is impressive, but they also didn't rank Boise State's academics, so we officially don't know where Boise State ranks according to U.S. News. But Boise State has also had ties to the Pac-12 via their wrestling program that was recently discontinued, something I disagree with because they wanted to have a baseball team, and apparently they can't have both, and they had to end an entire program to do so. But Boise State will likely only join as a football member if the Mountain West allows them to leave their other athletic teams there. If not, Boise State will have to move all their sports to the Pac-12 and have a lot of catching up to do. The Pac-12 would also welcome San Diego State with open arms because San Diego State has been a winning program at the Group of 5 level, especially over the last 3 years, posting a 31-8 record, beating 2 Pac-12 teams this season in Stanford and Arizona State. The Aztecs also have a very historic basketball program, and not to mention that San Diego market is wide open now that the Chargers have moved to LA, and it can prove to be very lucrative for the school and the conference. Now let's take a look at the new Pac-12 conference, and each team just fits right in. Boise State in the north, San Diego State in the south, making the north Boise State, California, Oregon, Oregon State, Stanford, Washington, and Washington State, and in the south, Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, San Diego State, UCLA, USC, and Utah. Now the Mountain West is in pretty much the same predicament the American Conference was in, and it still wants to maintain their status as one of, if not the best Group of 5 conference, and to do that, they'll reach out to the 5-time FCS national champion, winning them all in a row, North Dakota State, and Carson Wentz's alma mater. North Dakota State is the most FBS ready of any other FCS team, posting a record of 93-8 since 2011, winning 5 championships, and posting a perfect 5-0 record against FBS teams, 4 of them being Power 5, including a road win over then-ranked 13th Iowa. North Dakota State also plays at a dome, which is very appealing to traveling fans, and maybe even a permanent hosting site for the Mountain West Conference Championship if they make upgrades, of course, because it only holds 19,000 people. And to balance out the conference, they'll steal away Northern Illinois from the MAC conference to establish a solid recruiting pipeline in the state of Illinois, and it'll bring in a team that can compete in day one. And now let's take a look at the new Mountain West Conference. In the West, we have Fresno State, Hawaii, Nevada, San Jose State, UNLV, and Utah State, who was moved from the mountain. And in the mountain, we have Air Force, Colorado State, North Dakota State, New Mexico, Northern Illinois, and Wyoming. And for the final move of the video, the Mid-American Conference, MAC, replaces the loss of Northern Illinois by getting another Illinois team in Illinois State, bringing them up from the FCS level. Illinois State keeps the MAC in the state of Illinois to keep that pipeline alive, and they were a very successful FCS team, making it to the championship in 2014, but losing to none other than North Dakota State. But Northern Illinois has a lot to offer to the conference in terms of recruiting and market share. And now let's take a look at the MAC conference. We have Ball State, Eastern Michigan, Central Michigan, Illinois State, Toledo, and Western Michigan in the West. And in the East, we have Akron, Bowling Green, Buffalo, Kent State, Miami of Ohio, and Ohio. And that's all for the movement in this video, but there were 3 conferences that didn't make any moves at all, and that was the Southeastern Conference, SEC, Atlantic Coast Conference, ACC, and Conference USA. And here are how those conferences look. Well, there you guys have it. This is just my little idea of what could happen during the next conference realignment. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what moves you think would happen in the comment section. I look forward to reading those. I hope you enjoyed the video. There'll be a slideshow of all the new conferences in case you missed it. I'm out. See you next time.